Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Chairman, just want to make a quick intervention to put the record straight. The member who has just spoken said that the appointment of an independent committee in Australia was in the Australian legislation. That is not true. I have the legislation before me. It makes very plain that the report is produced by the Minister in Australia. The Minister prescribes the regulations. It is true that as a matter of practice in Australia, the Minister for the Environment has appointed a committee to be responsible for it. Now, how many members, I can just hear the cries of foul from the Green Party and the Labor Party if this report was to be produced by a committee appointed by me. What this report is going to be produced is by the government statistician and the Secretary for the Environment, and the member is simply factually incorrect in what she says of the Australian legislation, and I refer her to section 516 of their Act. The second point the Green member makes is this, that they want to include in this legislation the climate change data. Well, actually this Parliament has passed specific climate change legislation that requires the reporting, and to the United Nations scientific panel on climate change. We are a government that is not about repeating bureaucracy. We're not about repeating costs, and where there is solid reporting data that's required in one Act, to repeat it in another Act is exactly what our government is opposed to. But let's just test Eugenie Sage's proposition that we need to publish the exact names of those people that are the biggest greenhouse gas emitters. Well, let's start by saying, what are the biggest greenhouse gas emitters in New Zealand? Actually, it's dairy farmers. Farmers make up, with the combination of methane and greenhouse gases, they make up about 43% of New Zealand's emissions. But because it's spread over 30,000 farmers, you're not going to list in Ma and Pa blogs farmers in my electorate as the big emitters. It's a nonsense. And what's the second biggest sector of New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions? The transport sector. Well, does that mean I'm going to have to list the big car that I understand our colleague from New Zealand First drives around? Is he going to, because on the transport emissions, from what I've read in the newspaper, he's got a real big grunty car. I think it does 16 litres to the 100k or something of that sort. But let's just test. I apologise to the member. But regardless, it is a nonsense when the transport sector and the agricultural sector are made up of thousands, tens of thousands of individuals to somehow pretend that actually because you've got one factory or one emitter that they are a substantive part of the problem when they are not. That is just simply typical of an anti-business view from the Greens, rather than actually recognising that all of the science around climate change shows it is areas like the transport, which affects all New Zealanders. It's sectors like the energy sector, it's areas like agriculture, which are the bulk of the emissions, and for that reason, specifically listing the 100 top emitters does not make sense. And when you have a Climate Change Response Act that has a very high level of integrity about the reporting that's required to be audited by the IPCC, we are not, as a government, of a mind to repeat the cost to the New Zealand taxpayer of simply regurgitating the same information with amendments to this bill.